Surrey, land of the illegal basement suite. Yep, you heard it right. The overwhelming majority of basement rentals here in this city are illegal. And that may have you worried about buying a home with a rental that you rely on to help pay your crazy high mortgage. Or if you're selling, you're probably not even aware that you should be worried about a buyer coming back to sue you for lost rental income or lost value in the property if in the future the city were to call for the removal of that rental unit. But let me tell you a little secret. It's totally legal and okay to sell a property with an illegal basement suite here in Surrey and in many other cities across the province, but only if you do it correctly. And I really hate to say this because I know that other agents out there are working really hard and they can be very good at what they do. And I don't want to throw any heat at my own profession, but the reality is most agents have no clue how to advise their clients correctly when selling a home with an illegal suite. That's because this puts the buyers of that home in a bad spot if they don't understand exactly what's going on, and that could plunge both the seller and their agent into a lawsuit for years to come, all because their contracts are not executed properly at the time the offer is received. So in this video, I'm going to share with you what you need to know when selling a home with an illegal basement suite here in Surrey, BC, by sharing the 5 things that you need to do as a seller of the property in order to protect yourself. And we'll get right into that after I ask you to subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date on the market. Please go ahead and click the like button for avoiding lawsuits that your agents probably didn't even tell you could happen. Unless, of course, you hired my team to help sell your home. And speaking of hiring my team, if you need help in the markets of Surrey or anywhere across the lower mainland of British Columbia, you can book a call with me right now using the link in the description below at a time that works best for you. And now on to the video. And the first point I want you to know is that, yes, it is okay. I said is okay to sell a house with a suite that is not legal. As a bit of an overview, there are technically 3 different types of suites. One is legal with full permits from the city and you're paying taxes. 2 is registered. A registered suite is without permits, but you're going ahead and paying the taxes anyway, and the city has record of that. And 3rd, unauthorized, which is neither legal, registered, has no permits, and, well, you're not paying the taxes. Now, technically or legally, registered and unauthorized are both the exact same thing, falling under unauthorized accommodations. But the 3rd, I guess, is technically a little bit worse because you're not bribing City Hall with that extra yearly fee. It's also important to note that often, or most often anyway, banks do not discriminate on these distinctions. And likely, if you're relying on income from an illegal suite in order to qualify for a greater mortgage, well, the banks likely won't care. But each different city around the lower mainland, that's a different story. For example, here in my hometown of Surrey, basically the city doesn't care if you have permits, but they do actively try and get that extra fee coming in. So they at least want an unauthorized unit registered with the city so they can collect a little more tax. While Maple Ridge will kind of almost hunt you down. And sometimes they even make you decommission the suite completely if it wasn't constructed in the first place with full permission, permits, and a final occupancy. Now, as I mentioned, there are 5 things you need to do in order to sell your illegal basement suite home legally to a buyer. And 3 of those things are just simply telling the buyer about it on a form called the property disclosure statement. And I'm going to walk you through this here right now and show you exactly what I mean. So when you're selling a home here in, well, this is across the entire province of BC, as a detached single family home, you're likely going to fill out this form called the property disclosure statement. Simply put, this is a form that the seller fills out telling the buyer about the property. If there's a lawsuit, often this is the form that comes into play because this is where the seller is making a bunch of disclosures. But one very important disclosure, or number 1 out of 3 on this form that you're going to want to do, is under section 3 here, building. We're going to scroll down to Q, And Q says, do the premises contain unauthorized accommodation? And you have to either say yes, no, or I do not know. Now, I would assume you would know or not know if you own the property. But the first thing you have to do is tell the person, is it authorized or unauthorized? If it's legal, you would say no here. But if it's either registered or unauthorized, technically you have to say yes. Again, this is okay to sell a property with unauthorized accommodations as long as you tell the buyer that this is the case. They have to be informed about what they are buying. Now, this is where most agents stop. They say if you say yes on this box, you have provided the disclosure to the buyer, you are all set. This is where I get miffed when I receive disclosure statements from other agents because we skipped over 3I. 3I says, are you aware of any additions or alterations made without the required permit and final inspection, building, electrical, gas? And most people say, oh no, I don't know of anything that was done without permit. Well, guess what? If you have an illegal basement suite, it is illegal because it is done without permit or possibly even not finished with the final occupancy. So this also has to be checked no. And some agents get that. And often, maybe 50% of the time, I will see 3I checked as well. But there's one final one, and this is the big one. 4B of the property disclosure statement under general. This is the statement that if you are going to get sued because of the property disclosure statement, or if you are going to get sued in a transaction, it is likely because you either answered this incorrectly or you lied completely. The question is, are you aware of any latent defects in respect to the premises? A latent defect is simply something that is not easily discoverable, that if discovered could cause some sort of loss or maybe is not fit for habitation. Technically, something without a final occupancy is not fit for habitation, or without the required permits is not fit for habitation, or could cause loss if the city comes and tells the buyer to remove that suite because it's either not allowed there or it wasn't done with permits. That could cause financial loss. So this has to be checked as yes. And that is strictly because a latent defect means that a defect cannot be discerned through reasonable inspection. In other words, if I'm doing an inspection on the property, the actual inspector there may not be able to tell if that work was done. If it was done to a high quality, they may not be able to tell if that work was done with permits or not, because the permits aren't there. The permits are at City Hall. So if the work was done correctly, but there was no permit pulled, well, you have a material latent defect. Now, if you answer yes to those, obviously a buyer is going to get very freaked out because they're going to go, what do you mean there's work done without permits? What do you mean there's a material latent defect? I'm okay with 3Q. Well, that's where you have to come down to Section 5, additional comments, and you simply write in 3I plus 3Q plus 4B, basement suite finished without permits, or something to that effect. As long as you tell the buyer about it, that is okay. You are allowed to sell that property to a willing buyer. Now that's number 1, 2, and 3 of what you need to do as a seller if you're selling. And if you're a buyer, you will hopefully have reviewed that property disclosure statement and you will see if they are checked off correctly. And I don't know if you've bought a house recently, go back, check your property disclosure statement, comment down below. Let me know if they were answered correctly or not. Now, 4B could also be answered separately on the material latent defect form, but in most cases, a PDS, if number 5 is followed correctly, can be suffice instead of a material latent defect form, and that's my preferred method. However, number 4B could also be, or I guess technically should also be, entered on a material latent defect form, which is a completely separate form. But the fourth thing you need to do is when you're accepting an offer on a property, you need to make sure that your agent puts it in the contract. And not only puts it in the contract, but it should be in the listing even beforehand. So the buyer should receive something that says on the listing that the property contains unauthorized accommodations. However, when you're writing the offer or when you're countering an offer back and forth, you have to make sure that either the buyer's agent or your agent put it into the contract that the buyer is aware that the property contains unauthorized accommodation. And that clause even goes on a little bit further to say that the buyer is aware of the possible consequences of what will happen if the city in the future ever comes to them and tells them, hey, that suite's got to go, you got to take it out, or you got to get it re-permitted, you got to rip it back out again and get it re-permitted. Whatever that is, the buyer has to be aware that there are consequences if the city were to call for the removal of that illegal suite. Now, I alluded to this, but this is number 5. And this may be the most important part of all of them. Well, no, they're all equally important, but timing is extremely important here. Legally, when you have a material latent defect on a home, which an illegal basement suite is, your PDS, if that's the form you're going to use in order to deliver notice of that material latent defect, or if you're going to deliver the material latent defect form in itself, has to be provided to the buyer prior to writing the offer. That's not prior to acceptance of the offer. That is prior to writing the offer. This drives me crazy because on my listings, I provide the PDS on every single listing for the agents to give to their buyers. And then I still get those agents writing a condition on receiving the PDS. And it's just a little bit of laziness on that agent's part. So when a counteroffer goes back with a house with an illegal basement suite in it, that has to get scratched. I will not have a property disclosure statement condition in the accepted offer. I want to know that the buyer has read and approved the property disclosure statement prior to acceptance of that offer. And if you do all of that right, it is legal for you to sell your house with an illegal basement suite. And if your agent tells you that this is not the correct way, well, I think maybe you may want to rethink your hiring practices. If you want to learn more about property disclosure statements, make sure to check out this video right here or this one so you can learn everything you need to know when buying a home with a basement suite in Surrey.